contemporary cities couldn't cope with growth. The contemporary city needs a full redesign. What if we removed cars? What if we got rid of streets? What if we innovated in the public space? What if we built around nature instead of over it? What if everything you needed was always a 5-minute walk away? What if invisible technology generates carefree and open urban space? What if sustainability was not a goal, but a given? What if we replaced outdated urban services with new services driven by artificial intelligence? What if we built the line? A 170-kilometer revolution in urban living. Protecting the Earth's most stunning nature while creating unmatched livability. A home to all of us. Welcome to the line. NEOM.
سمو الأمير، تحدثت في مناسبة سابقة عن الاعتدال. ما هو مفهوم الاعتدال في رأي الأمير محمد؟
طبعا يعني هذا كلمة واسعة للغاية، ويعني كل الفقهاء المسلمين والعلماء من أكثر من 1000 سنة هم يجتهدون بما هو مفهوم الاعتدال. فما أعتقد أنه أنا في موقع أقدر أشرح وش مفهوم الاعتدال بقدر ما أنه ألتزم بدستور المملكة العربية السعودية اللي هو القرآن والسنة ونظامها الأساسي للحكم، وتطبيقه على أكمل وجه بمفهوم واسع يشمل الجميع.
هذا يقودني إلى سؤال ثاني اللي هو مساحة الشريعة في الدولة، يعني على مستوى الدستور، على مستوى القضاء، على مستوى الفضاء العام، على مستوى حريات الأفراد.
مثل ما ذكرت لك، دستورنا هو القرآن، كان والآن وسوف يستمر للأبد، ونظام أساسي الحكم ينص على ذلك بشكل واضح للغاية. احنا كحكومة أو مجلس الشورى كمشرع أو الملك كمرجع للسلطات الثلاثة ملزم بتطبيق القرآن بشكل أو آخر، لكن في الشأن الاجتماعي والشأن الشخصي احنا فقط ملزمين بتطبيق النصوص اللي منصوص عليها بالقرآن بشكل واضح. يعني لا يجب أن يطرح عقوبة شرعية بدون نص قرآني واضح أو نص صريح من السنة. طبعا لما أتكلم عن نص صريح من السنة، أغلب المدونين الحديث في تدويناتهم يصنفون الحديث بناء على تصنيفهم الخاص مثل البخاري أو مسلم أو غيره أنه حديث صحيح أو حسن أو ضعيف، لكن في تصنيف آخر هو الأهم اللي هو الحديث المتواتر والآحاد والخبر، وهو المرجع الرئيسي في استنتاج الأحكام واستنباطها من الناحية الشرعية. فلما أتكلم مثلا عن الحديث المتواتر اللي هو يعني من جماعة لجماعة لجماعة لجماعة، مجموعة أشخاص يعني عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، فهذه الأحاديث قليلة للغاية لكن ثباتها قوي جدا، وتفسيرها يخضع للاجتهاد حسب الظرف والمكان وحسب كيف فهم هذا الحديث. بينما الآحاد اللي هو فرد عن فرد عن فرد عن فرد عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، أو جماعة جماعة عن فرد عن جماعة عن جماعة عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، ففي فرد في الحلقة، فهذا يسمى حديث آحاد. وهذا يصنف أصناف كثيرة، منه الصحيح ومنه الحسن ومنه الضعيف. وهذا الحديث الآحاد غير ملزم بإلزامية الحديث المتواتر إلا إذا اقترن بنصوص شرعية واضحة وبمصلحة دنيوية واضحة، خاصة إذا كان حديث آحاد صحيح، وهذا يشكل أيضا جزء قليل من حديث رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. بينما الخبر اللي هو عن فرد 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 ما نعرف، عن فرد 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 عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، أو عن جماعة جماعة فرد فرد ما نعرف عن جماعة فرد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، ففي انقطاع. هذا الخبر هو اللي يشكل النسبة العظمى من الأحاديث، هذا بشكل لا يؤخذ فيه لأنه غير ثابت، و غير يعني ملزم. ولو نرى في سيرة الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم عندما كتب الحديث في وقتها أمر بحرقها وعدم كتابتها، فما بالك إذا أنت ترجع للحديث الخبر وتلزم فيها الناس من الناحية الشرعية، وقد أيضا تطعن في قدرات الله سبحانه وتعالى في أن القرآن صالح لكل زمان ومكان. فالحكومة في الجوانب الشرعية ملزمة بتطبيق النصوص اللي في القرآن، وملزمة بتطبيق النصوص في الحديث المتواتر، وتنظر للحديث الآحاد حسب صحته وضعفه ووضعه، ولا تنظر في الحديث الخبر بتاتا إلا إذا كان تسند عليه رأي فيه مصلحة واضحة للإنسان. فلا عقوبة على شأن ديني إلا بنص قرآني واضح، وتطبق هذه العقوبة بناء على كيفية طبقها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. فيعني مثلا لو بضرب مثال الزنا، الزاني الغير محصن يجلد، الزاني المحصن يقتل، وهذا نص واضح. لكن عندما أتت الزانية رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وقالت رسول الله أنا زنيت بما معناته الحديث لأني لا أحفظ نصا، صد عنها أكثر من مرة إلى ما صرت عليه. بعدين قال لها اذهبي إلى ما تتأكدين أنت حامل ولا لا. عادت له مرة أخرى ونفس السيناريو تكرر، وقال لها اذهبي حتى تضعين، وعادت له مرة أخرى وقال لها اذهبي حتى تفطميه، وممكن ما ترجع ولا سأل عن اسمه ولا سأل عن من هي. فكون انك تاخذ النص القرآني وتطبقه بطريقة غير اللي طبقها الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم، وتبحث عن الشخص لتثبت عليه التهمة، بينما الرسول أتاه المتهم معترف وعامل بهالطريقة، هذا ليس شرع الله. وانك تجي تطبق نص شرعي، تطبق عقوبة بحجة انها عقوبة شرعية ولا يوجد فيها نص للمعاقبة في القرآن او في الحديث المتواتر، هذا ايضا يعني تزييف للشريعة. فالله سبحانه وتعالى عندما اراد انه نعاقب على جرم شرعي نص عليه، وعندما حرم شيء ووعد بالعقاب في الآخرة لم ينص ويأمرنا كبشر بأنه عاقب عليه، وترك الأمر للفرد بأنه يختار وحسابه يوم الدين. وفي الأخير الله غفور رحيم ويغفر كل شيء إلا أن يشرك به. فهذا هو المنهج الصحيح للتطبيق القرآن والسنة بناء على دستورنا ونظام الأساسي الحكم.
أنتم سمو الأمير ملزمون بمدرسة معينة، يعني مثل مدرسة الشيخ محمد عبد الوهاب هي التي ستفسر هذا القرآن وهذه الأحاديث؟
طول العمر احنا متى ما ألزمنا نفسنا بمدرسة معينة أو بعالم معين معناته ألهنا البشر. الله سبحانه وتعالى والرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم لم يضع الله سبحانه وتعالى بينه وبين الناس حجاب، أنزل قرآنه والرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم طبقه على الأرض، والاجتهاد مفتوح للأبد. والشيخ محمد الوهاب لو خرج من قبره ووجدنا نلتزم بنصوصه ونغلق عقولنا للاجتهاد ونؤلهه أو نضخمه، لأول من عارض هذا الشيء. فلا يوجد مدرسة ثابتة ولا يوجد شخص ثابت. القرآن الاجتهاد مستمر فيه، والسنة صلى الله عليه وسلم الاجتهاد مستمر فيها، وكل فتاوى حسب كل زمان ومكان وحسب كل فهم. يعني مثلا لما قبل 100 عام يفتي أحد المشايخ الأجلاء بفتوى معينة وهو لا يعرف مثلا الكرة الأرضية أنها مدورة أو لا، وهو لا يعرف قارات العالم، وهو لا يعرف التقنية وإلى آخره، ففتواه بناء على المعطيات والمعلومات اللي عنده وفهمه للقرآن والسنة. لكن هذه تتغير في وضعنا الحالي، ففي الأخير مرجعنا هو القرآن وسنة الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم مثل ما ذكرت لك.
And I'm listening to this, and I'm incredulous as I'm listening to this. But then the $1 million question comes, and this is the $1 million question that is put out by Abdullah al-Mudaifa. And I don't know whether this was planned or he did it innocently. He asked, well, what about this extremism that we have here? What about the Wahhabi movement? What about the extremists who are standing against Western education, standing against. How are you going to deal with that situation? What are you going to do with all these traditions that seem to shut down much of what you would like to do? And you could see that he was nervous. He kept on doing this, you know, like he
I
had.
noticed that. I thought that was very strange. Like he was
well?
emotionally. He was. There was something in what he was saying, like like you're doing, that was catching in his throat.
Like I thought
this is very
he was
curious.
uncomfortable with his dress. But what was fascinating, if you look at the rest of the interview, he hardly did that at all. He only started doing
made him very nervous, and nervous in regard to his throat.
Right.
And I think, isn't that interesting in light of what might happen?
Okay, I'm not going to take that any further than that, because we're not in any way saying in any shape or form that this will happen to him. But it was obvious to me that he was nervous, and it was obvious that he used that to delay his response, because every time he did that, he paused. It was like a or a o, like what we would do in English. And then he came out and said, and this was fascinating to me. He said, "Well, we have the Constitution, and the Constitution is the Quran. So the Constitution is this book right here." As if that was a de facto, that would answer the question. However, then, of course, our good friend Wadaifa said, well, what about the Hadith? What about these many traditions? And he said, well, you know, as you well know, there are different gradations. And he just quickly named them off real quickly. Sahih, Hasan, Da'if, those three real quickly. And he pretty much said anything that was Hasan or Da'if, pretty much dispense with, but that which is Sahih must agree with this. Must agree with this. And then he went on to say that, and because then the question came out, well, what are you going to do with the Wahhabis? Because the Wahhabis, as you well know, since the 1700s, have been really the theological base for Saudi Arabia, and for all the princes which he represents, who are the political wing, the Brotherhood, which is the Wahhabis, have pretty much given them their authority, their religious authority, their theological authority for 400 years. It was fascinating to see what he responded on that. And his response was this. He said, why are we allowing one man to be an arbiter between God and us?
It was a wonderful answer, because it was a quintessentially Wahhabi answer, and yet he turned it against Wahhab. It was really marvelous, you know? Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab in the late 18th century preached that all the Islam had fallen into idolatry, essentially, and that it had to be cleansed of this idolatry by removing everything that did not come from the Quran and from the Prophet, as he saw it. And so Wahhab himself would applaud and say, yes, the idea that I have created a school of thought is idolatrous in itself. But nobody has said this in Saudi Arabia up until MBS. And so it's really, I thought, now that's an extraordinarily clever thing. You got to give the man credit. That he's going to get a lot of pushback from the Wahhabi leaders, and he has the perfect argument to give against them. The one that they will not have any effective comeback to.
That's right. Brilliant. It was a master stroke on his part, and I thought it was brilliantly done, because that's the very thing he is claiming. It was almost like he was saying Wahhab would roll in his grave if he saw what you are doing with him and elevating him to such a status. This is what you don't do. This is mushrikun. This is mushrik. This is elevating someone else alongside God. So what was fascinating, he then said, so what is it? It must be a continuous contextualization. We must have, basically what he was saying is, we must have ijtihad for today. There is not just one ijtihad, that's the word for interpretation of scripture, that must be codified in the 1700s. It must be continuous, including today. But what is that?
That's problematic, because that's a Shiite argument, and that's going to get him in trouble. Because according to Wahhabi Islam, according to Sunni Islam in general, the gate of Ijtihad closed with the death of Ahmad ibn Hanbal in 855 AD. And there has been no Ijtihad ever since then. It would be illegitimate, because there was ijma consensus on all the major questions, and they were settled. by all the pioneers of Islamic jurisprudence, the ones who formulated it. And so there's nothing to discuss. It's only the application of what has been settled. And so for him to say, oh no, it's all up for grabs, that's a very problematic part of what he said in terms of Sunni Islam, not just Wahhabi Islam, but Sunni
And
Islam.
who is going to do the ijtihad now? He? Is he
That's
going to
the
be the
problem.
arbiter?
The people who are the founders of the traditional schools of Islamic jurisprudence. And they all, like I say, Ahmad ibn Hanbal is the last one. The Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanafi, and Hanbali schools, and Hanbal died in 855. That's the end of that formulation of jurisprudence.
What do you do with Muhammad Abdu, who in 1920s said that we must reopen ijtihad? And he gave a fatwa from Al-Azhar University there in Cairo. What would you do with that statement?
Well, that's the kind of thing that he can point to. But that didn't get a whole lot of traction in the Islamic world. And there were many people who thought that Abdu had overstepped the boundaries in saying this, and that he was going against what was settled consensus.
Okay, so he would be a representative of the, well, he would be representative of theologians for the 1920s. Now we have a crown prince who is not a theologian in any sense of the term. In fact, he is despised by the theologians, not only shutting down, according to some of the articles that I've been reading, if you take what he is saying and put it in practical terms, you're shutting down 90% of the hadith. And he's also shutting down Wahhabism to them in one interview. Now, he's shutting down two of the stringent areas that Muslims are absolutely dependent on to know how to walk, talk, eat, drink, and sleep.
Yeah, it's actually, not to put too fine a point on it, but what he said was ultimately completely incoherent and impractical. There is no way that it could work. There's no way that it could happen.
Help me here. From your perspective, Quran only, have you ever engaged with people who are Quran only or Quranists?
Yeah. Yes, years ago, but yes.
Okay. What has been, just from your experience, what has been that experience when you engage with them?
Well, I actually said to them the same thing I said to you, noting all these verses saying obey the messenger and asking them how they would do that. And then characteristically, as I'm sure you've had experience with in hundreds of instances, they didn't answer the question, but rather changed the subject and went on to expatiate at length about how Quran, it's always been Islamic jurisprudence, which is absolutely true, that if hadith contradict Quran, they're to be thrown out. And so the Quran is the ultimate authority. And then went on to say that the Quran, that the formulators of the collectors of the hadith threw out numerous stories that they considered to be inaccurate, and thus it was just a matter of prudence to be a Quranist, and it was guarding against the sullying of the purity of the religion and so on, but they never addressed that central point.
This is a good question that Bart's going to come up with. Now, you kind of already answered it, and that is, if you put the Quran and the traditions side by side, aren't they both problematic?
Very much so. I mean, another one we could mention is also out of chapter 18, which is the most wonderful chapter, really. It's got so many interesting, entertaining things, but it's got the sun setting in the muddy pool and Dhul Qarnayn traveling to the end of the world to see the sun setting there. And so what if MBS wants to have a space program and the constitution of his the constitution of his state is the Quran that says the world is flat? This is going to, the problems are endless and can be, we could go on for hours about the absurdities this is going to come into.
The moon following the sun, and the sun then following the moon, which you see in the Quran. You have educated the West. You have educated us to understand not only what Islam is saying finally, but also where their sources are, and that we need to go back to their source, which is what he is doing in this interview. He is trying to go back with us to the source. I don't think he's ever read it. I think
wouldn't be in the
memorized it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously he's an Arabic speaker, but classical Arabic is not modern standard Arabic. And it may be also that when you're memorizing something at a very young age, you're not engaging with it intellectually. And I'm sure that there are many passages, if not the whole thing, that he's never really sat down and pondered in an intellectual manner or thought about their implication.
I would imagine being a Saudi prince, he has had a very sheltered lifestyle. He's been very, very careful where he's been educated. He made a very big thing about the fact that he was educated in Saudi Arabia and he didn't go overseas. I thought that was fascinating. But nonetheless,
he doesn't have an influence. See, he's not tainted by this. Is not his reform movement is not coming from being corrupted by the West. It's coming from pure Saudi Islamic principles.
Now, here's what's fascinating, because if this is the case, it's obvious to me that he is not aware of just the passages we brought up. I mean, we just did this off the top of our head. What you brought up and what Bart Connolly is bringing up here, he is not aware of these problems. So he's certainly not done a critical analysis. I don't think he's ever had anybody confront him on the Quran. I think he really does believe that the Quran can pass every muster, can pass every critical analysis, is probably the most relevant book for today. Are you getting that idea?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I mean, this is the kind of thing that you're taught in Islamic societies, as you well know, from birth, that this is the most extraordinary book, this is the most extraordinary man, and everything they do is, everything the book teaches, you should do, everything the man does, you should emulate. And so I'm sure that he simply assumes that if Saudi Arabia is based thoroughly on the Quran, then it will zoom ahead of the rest of the world.
That will take care of all the problems right there in one fell swoop.
You know, it's kind of like the passages in chapter 8 of the Quran, Surah Al-Anfal, the spoils of war, about the Battle of Badr, and how they won because Allah fought for them.
Yeah.
And so the corollary then, coming after the Battle of Uhud and other passages in chapter 3 and elsewhere, that they lost because they weren't pleasing Allah. And so it's a one-to-one correlation. The more you obey Allah, the more you will succeed in this world, not just in the next. And so the idea, the Christian idea of the wicked prospering, why do the wicked prosper? Why would the Messiah be crucified, and so on? These things don't exist in Islam. In Islam, if you obey Allah, then you will do well in this world. So he's actually just betraying the mindset of the most pious Muslim in that you want to get ahead in the world, then you redouble your efforts to engage Islamic piety, and then you will do well in this world.
One last question on this thing before we go to the next one. What do you do with the fact that many of those he's imprisoned or his father has imprisoned are the very people who have said the same thing he's now saying?
So this is another thing that he's going to get in trouble for. Just like I was suggesting earlier, that he's following Shiite ideas of IJTIHAD. This is, I say that, by the way, let me make that clear, that it's a Shiite, it's more likely that they will call him a Shiite than a follower of Muhammad Abdu, because of the tensions with Iran today. And the sharpness that they have brought, those tensions have brought to the Sunni Shiite divide. And so it's an easy way to tar him, to call him something like that. But in any case, yes, he's imprisoned people who are saying exactly the same thing. His enemies can very easily bring this up. I'm sure they will. And I wouldn't be in the least surprised if he falls from power in the next few years. On the other hand, as we have also already said, he's obviously very canny and intelligent, and he may figure out a way to overcome all this.
Well, I think if he doesn't really care, if he can prove and get his country into the 21st century and make it one of the make it the magnet for the whole world in these very areas that he is saying, then he doesn't really care what the people say, because he'll have so much profit on his hand, and he'll be able to say, but look what I've done. Look what I've done in almost every area, technologically, educationally, socially, and all the rest. So possibly that's what he's thinking of. And he realizes that the writing's on the wall. If you are going to be held to respect, especially in the 21st century, especially in the Western mind, you're going to have to deal with some of these 7th century outlandish rules, laws, and institutions that he thinks only exist in the Hadith, without realizing they're just as bad or even worse in the Quran. Let's go to the next one, which is Yaqub Ismail. He says, time for another canonization of the Quran, the sixth Quran, and the final one by editing and clearing all the verses that were added after the 1st century of Hijrah. And then the 5th canon would be our good man Muhammad al-Husayni al-Haddad, who then did the 1924 canon there in Al-Azhar University, the Hafs Quran, this one that I have in my hand right here. So that's 5, and those are the recognized 5 canons. What he's saying in his ear, looks like we're going to get a 6th one, and this will be.
That's an interesting idea, but what would it do? I'm not sure what it would accomplish. I mean, it would be interesting if MBS were to produce a Quran that actually endeavored to get rid of the problematic passages, but what would you have then? 5 mimeographed sheets? You wouldn't have very much left.
It probably would only be about 5 sheets that would be legitimate, or that would be relevant for today. And you're right, that is a real problem, and I can see the dilemma for any Muslim, not just MBS, for any Muslim. One of the greatest things about all of our discussions is all we need to do is open its pages and read it. Once you read it, look how irrelevant it is, look how impractical it is, and how it does not belong in the 21st century. Unlike the Bible, when you look at the...
I mean, giving talks around the country over the years, I have several times challenged when I have questioners saying, well, you're not quoting all the passages about peace and brotherhood and tolerance. And I would open the book and say, find one, point one out to me. And here, let's play another game too. Open it to any page, and if that page does not have a furious castigation of unbelievers, then I'll give you $100. Of course, nobody ever found there is no such page. Every page of the Quran has some kind of castigation of unbelievers.
Okay. And
so, if you're going to open up Saudi Arabia to the world and make non-Muslims able to live, you're going to have very little left.
You're going to have very little left. That's a great way to end this talk. I thank you so much.
Islamic reform. Islamic reform is one of the most difficult things to accomplish in the world. In my book, The History of Jihad, I show that Islam is full of reformers. And there have been reformations in Islam throughout Islamic history. And every one of them has made it uglier and more violent than it was already, because that's what's in the core texts. And so you want reform in Islam, you're going to be sorry for what you wished for if you get it, because it's just going to make things worse. But of course, in America, there's so much ignorance about all this that people think, oh, what we need is Islamic reform. And look, here's a moderate Muslim spokesman on television, and he's saying all the right things. Everything is going to be okay because most Muslims think the way he does. And they don't understand. The Quran says, this day I have perfected your religion for you. Chapter 5, verse 3. How are you going to reform what's perfect? And why is it that when you get a reformer who's sincere, then suddenly he's getting death threats? And the government of Sudan executed Mahmoud Mohammed Taha in 1985 for heresy, for saying that the Meccan passages should take precedence over the Medinan ones because the Meccans were less violent. This all militates against the reform. But if MBS is able to do something here, and like I said, I don't think he's going to do it, but if he were to manage somehow to do it in a way that's beyond me, which would then he could end up actually forming some kind of new understanding of Islam itself that could make a massive geopolitical difference.
Robert, I love and this is a great way to end off. What you're saying and what people are asking for is people are realizing, and in fact, this is even what the Mr. Al-Mudaifa was asking. We do want to see an acceptable face. We do want to see a Saudi Arabia that is respected by the whole world. But we've got a problem. We have got the Wahhabi movement. We have got these extremists. How best can we get back to this acceptable face? His answer was this book. This is the Reformation he wants to come back to. And in some ways, isn't that exactly what Martin Luther demanded? Didn't he say sola scriptura? Yeah. Wasn't that the whole premise of the Reformation movement for us as Christians? We came back to this book, and by coming back to this book, we actually got back on track again, right? Basically, it comes back down to these two books, doesn't it? He would like to get everybody to come back to this book. He wants to eradicate Wahhabism without realizing, what do you think Wahhabism is? It is this book. It is a strict reading of this book, word by word, verse by verse, application.
People would ask Wahhab, what are his thoughts, and what can you give us a treatise? And he only has very brief writings that survive, because he said, just read the Quran. This is all this is about. And so the problem is the fundamental difference between those two books that most people don't want to recognize.
And this is one reason why when Martin Luther was asked, what is it that they're to do? He kept on saying, just the Bible. Sola Scriptura. Only go back to Scripture. This book is relevant. This book is relevant for every day, for everyone, for you and me, for anyone. And that's why it's so good to be able to do a comparison and see what MBS wants is what a lot of people would like, but you better not go back to this book. You've got the wrong book. This is just as bad as the Hadith. Come on back to the real book. Come back to the better book. Come on. So thank you for all you have done. Thank you for all that you're going to continue to do. And thank you for coming on board here on Fander Films. God bless you. And we'll see you all again once we have another problem to unpack.